when you start to feel like a yell is coming, sing. This is very stressful.
How do we get our kids to listen without threats and bribes or losing our cool?
A threat would be if I come back into this room and I don't see that you've got your clothes on, we're not going to the park. It's more of a game, more of like, if I come back into this room and I see a child wearing his jumper, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if I'm going to have to do this mum silly dance or if I'm going to have to do something else. There's just so much shame in parenting. This idea that we have to be a good parent, we have to be calm all of the time. And it's just not true.
Everything's about bananas. When I started being a little bit silly and said, yes, we're brushing your teeth with bananas, and he was giggling his head off, he did actually start to brush his teeth.
Remembering that even though you've given the lesson once, twice, 350,000 times, that's parenting. My daughter will end up kind of like going, oh, mum. And I'll be like, oh, what? Oh, I've just energy matched my own daughter. Or like,
well, Jade, it's a pleasure to have you here on the podcast today. Thank you for joining me. Would you mind by starting off by just telling us a little bit about your journey and how you became a psychologist?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it feels like a long time ago, but I remember taking a psychology A-level and thinking I quite enjoyed it, but I also had my own opinions. And then really just kind of grew from there. Like, I've always been fascinated by people. I've always had a strong kind of part of me that loves to kind of help others, understand others. And I think really it just grew from there. And I think sometimes you think you fall into these things and it's not until you kind of look back and think, oh, maybe there were some like childhood experiences or family experiences that maybe led me into it. But I think just genuinely my love of just wanting to kind of help people understand people and make sense of people's lives.
I love that. And now you're a mum of 3 yourself, aren't you? So you've got lots of hands-on experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 3 young kids. So it's a busy time.
Yeah, for sure. I think yours are similar ages to mine, aren't they? We were just discussing. So lots of parents talk about how they lose their temper with young children and how that makes them feel awful afterwards. Why do you find that happens? And is there a better way that we can handle it?
Oh, gosh. Yeah. I mean, the parents that I work with, that I help, like, I hear it all the time. There's just so much shame in parenting. This idea that we have to be a good parent, we have to be calm all of the time. And it's just not true. And I think actually it's that pressure that we put on ourselves to be this, permanently calm, gentle, seemingly doesn't even have any emotions kind of parent is not real life. I think that for many parents that I work with, and I'm sure many parents listening to this podcast, have some kind of awareness that maybe they want to parent slightly differently to how they were raised. And then we're kind of in this kind of in between, this kind of messy phase of trying to kind of understand our own childhood and maybe give ourselves certain experiences that we didn't get growing up at the same time as raising our kids. I often say to parents, like, it's not like we can I'm just going to go work on myself, pause parenting for a moment, just go work on myself, because parenting is every day. It's 24/7. So we're having to kind of help ourselves in understanding our own experiences at the same time as raising our kids. And the world has become a very noisy place now. And I think parents are getting incredibly confused about what that should look like. So I think in terms of understanding regulation, my biggest message to everyone is that understanding regulation is the key, because regulation and being regulated is not the same as being calm all the time. It's actually about becoming dysregulated, becoming stressed. Parenting can be very stressful. We're doing it on lack of sleep. Sometimes we've forgotten to eat. And it's actually about how can we bring ourselves back more quickly, more flexibly, rather than expecting ourselves to be calm all of the time.
Okay, that's a really interesting point, actually, because I think exactly that. It's unrealistic to expect to be calm all of the time, isn't it? Because we are still human beings, even though we're trying to parent and even though we might be trying to be consciously aware to some of the cycles and patterns we want to break. But I know in my own experience, I do get frustrated at myself when I shout, but I also know it's unrealistic. I cannot go through my whole parenting journey without losing my temper, because sometimes if I am tired or overstimulated, it's those moments that you're not consciously aware that you do snap. And I love that bit about, how we can kind of go back and regulate ourselves. And I find it quite useful to actually understand the concept of rupture and repair, and understanding that by me making a mistake and going back and sort of saying to my children, look, I made a mistake and I shouted and I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I could have done things differently. And having that repair with them is actually a really important lesson for our kids to learn as well.
Yeah, I think there's 2 really important things that you've just kind of spoken to. And one of them is when we yell at our kids, if you can develop this language around, that's a part of me yelled at my kids. And actually that part of you that lost control, that yelled at our kids, that is a part of you that's actually trying desperately to regulate. And usually it's a part that has been carrying way too much for way too long. It's usually a part that is actually really trying to actually protect you and protect your kids in some way. And the other thing that you mentioned there was, the absolute power of repair. I think it's the number one strategy every parent needs to have. I think there's often a missing component in this. So a lot of families and parents I work with, they start to learn and get really good at repairing with their kids. So this is about owning our emotions. So rather than you're making me feel mad, I'm feeling angry, so we own it. And then being able to kind of talk our kids through that, what we're modeling. And repair is really important because ultimately parenting is a relationship. And so we're showing our kids that we're human. And by gifting yourself that permission to be human, you're also gifting your kids the permission to be human too. But I think the repair part that we often miss out is, do we actually repair with ourselves? So we repair with kids and we maybe say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have shouted, I'm working on my calm, etc. But are we then giving ourselves permission to feel what we're feeling and name it? Like, this is hard. So many parents come to me saying, I feel like yelling at my kids means I'm failing, or I'm finding this so much harder than everybody else around me.
I think lots of people have this misconception that that our bond with our children is our attachment. Sorry, that's the word I was looking for. Our attachment is really fragile. And I think as parents, we're worried about damaging that and not being able to repair that relationship in the long term. But that's not really correct, is it?
Right. I mean, children are wired, human beings are wired for attachment, for connection with their caregivers. And I think ultimately being aware of that and being aware of your relationship. And this is why I always describe, yes, we're here to help teach our kids, but I honestly believe our kids are also here to teach us.
Yeah.
And sometimes they will poke and prod at those parts of ourselves that are like, oof, that's painful. When your kids maybe say things like, I hate you, Mum. They don't mean I hate you. They mean I hate how I feel, and you're the safest person I can give that to.
Yeah.
And the more we can understand that this is about building bridges and this is about just helping our kids. But also acknowledging that, we also have an attachment system. So that's why when we become parents, our own attachment system and the experiences we had growing up is going to get ignited. It's going to get activated by our children. But absolutely, it really is about a relationship. Attachment is about having that safety and closeness in relationship, owning when we mess up, but then also modeling compassion. And one of the best ways, anything that I describe to parents, I think the simpler I can make it, the better, right? We don't need complicated strategies.
Absolutely.
So I always say, just ask yourself, even if you don't know the answer, what do I feel? What do I need? Even if you don't know, then say that. I don't know what I feel and I don't know what I need. And then start there. So it's just being able to articulate that is going to really help separate what's my stuff and what's my kids'.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a great question to ask in the moment, isn't it? I know for myself, just thinking about what I often feel I need in the moment. And sometimes it's just that bit of quiet, that bit of space to think before I actually respond. But that can be quite hard to kind of get in the moment, can't it?
Yeah.
Especially with young children.
Absolutely. I call these moments messy moments.
Yeah.
Right. And if parenting in those moments feels messy, it's because it's messy.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I have, as you said, 3 children. I also have a noise sensitivity, so that blends well. And so actually a lot of the time in those tricky moments, it is about sometimes having and building a kind of resource kit for yourself. Sometimes that is stepping away. And you can say to your kids what you're going to do. Another strategy of mine will be if I start to notice, the more you can notice the sensations that are in your body, that's how you start to create more of a pause between a child's behavior or reaction and your subsequent reaction. So we're trying to create a bigger gap between that. And so noticing the sensations that come up for us. And one of my best tips, and this might frustrate your children, but I say still go for it, is when you start to feel like a yell is coming, sing. Literally activate your vocal cords and sing. So sometimes I will literally, excuse for the listeners, I am not a good singer, but I might sometimes sing, this is very stressful. And it just helps ground yourself, be a bit more present. Sometimes my kids laugh, sometimes they get irritated. But for me, it's better than, letting that shout out.
Yeah.
But we still have to. What I think a lot of the time is we're trying to hold it in and we're holding it in and we're holding it in. I mustn't shout. And then where does it go? And then we get through the day, we get through the difficult mealtime, and then bedtime comes. And that's usually when our tank is absolutely full. We cannot hold the lid on any longer. and we erupt, and then we spend the evening feeling guilty.
Yeah.
And so we have to find ways that we can let those little bits out throughout the day. And singing is one of my ways. There's a lot of singing in my house.
Love that, because it does, that release is what actually makes us feel better, isn't it? So in that moment when you shout, you momentarily feel better until you get flooded with the guilt and having to go back and repair the damage that you've done. So I love that. That's a great little tip there, of a little release throughout the day. So even though we know that it doesn't help to shout, so many of us genuinely do struggle with it. How do you think we can start to break those patterns? Any other advice on what we could do there?
I mean, everything always starts with awareness. And so noticing that this is something that you're struggling with, this is something that you would like help with. I think that's the first stage of it. I think sometimes we can pre-repair with our kids. So we can say, I'm struggling with X. This is what I'm doing to work on it. A lot of parents fear I shouldn't really talk about my feelings, or I shouldn't talk about the things I'm finding hard to my kids. I don't want to put that on them. So the way I would say is actually kids need to see our humanness. They need to see that we struggle with some things, and this is what we're doing to help ourselves. This is who we're speaking to get help for that. And that's modelling an amazing thing, right? Because sometimes actually kids can then see, oh, wow, my mum struggles with big emotions too. I'm not the only one. And it really kind of humanises the things. But we're not putting on our kids to fix or to be different or to be quieter, although that would make life a little bit easier at times, maybe out in the garden. But it's like being able to just explore with yourself and name it, like, this is the thing that I'm struggling with. And I think one of the hard things can be, I would say, I have a real love-hate, maybe that's too strong, but relationship with social media, because it's how I connect with many of my audience. It's how we connected. Amazing things can happen through the platforms. However, I also think that there is so much pressure now, and there's so much kind of misinformation. There's so much overload of information. So I would say reduce down how much you're consuming. Pick one person, pick one that you feel feels aligned with your values, and then drown out the rest, because otherwise you're just going to get flooded with so much information and you're just going to get confused. Yeah,
and you're right. I think we are subject to that as parents, aren't we? We kind of have all these expectations of shoulds, you should do this, you should do that. And I think it's that can really leave us feeling overwhelmed. And that sense of I should have is what leads us to beat ourselves up at bedtime when we feel like we should have done it differently, rather than, as you say, kind of sometimes just offering up that self-compassion for the fact that it is really hard and this is a really messy chapter, and sometimes we're doing the best that we can with the tools and resources that we've got in the moment.
Absolutely. And I believe that wholeheartedly. I'm a psychologist. I live, eat and breathe this stuff. And I still find parenting hard. I still find that there are messy moments. And often if I have lost my cool with the kids in any way, shape or form, I still get those guilt feelings. Guilt's not a bad emotion. It has messages for us. It tells me that I have true guilt, tells me I have done something or not done something that's out of alignment with my values, right? And what tips us into a slightly more unhelpful space is when that guilt, I feel bad for yelling at my kids, tips into shame, which is I am a bad mother. And that's what we want to shift, because that's going to keep you stuck. Because when we feel shame, we disconnect from ourselves, we disconnect from people around us who might be supportive. And I think just really appreciating that actually there are so many parents finding this hard. I work with hundreds of parents, who are psychologists like myself, other therapists, and there's so many shoulds that they have too, because I think it's almost like, well, I should know better. I've read all the books, I've listened to all the podcasts, I've done a postgraduate degree in clinical psychology. I should know how to parent my kids. I help other parents find their regulation. So therefore, surely I should be regulated all of the time. I should be that calm parent, right? All of the time. So then when I am a human and I am feeling irritated by my kids, or maybe I yell, of course I get a thought sometimes. It's like, you fraud. You fraud. You've just literally recorded a whole module on how to regulate your emotions.
Yeah.
That's when compassion comes in. That's when it's like, it makes sense. You're human.
Yeah.
I have human needs, and parents have a lot of unmet needs. We're doing all of the things all of the time. We have these really strong caregiving parts. We have a very strong outward gaze. What do others want and need of me instead of what do I want and need for myself? And so we end up with a lot of unmet needs. So beneath that anger, beneath that rage that sometimes bubbles up is a lot of unmet needs.
I love that. And that's definitely something I suffer with, actually. I feel the more I've kind of got into this work of understanding, the shoulds of what we should be doing for our children, or the more optimal ways of how we could do things. I've actually found it harder in my own parenting journey because I feel like I should know better, and actually trying to understand that I am still human, and I get home after recording a podcast for the day and I'm tired and I'm overrun and the kids come in the door and want all these things from me, and I do snap in those moments, and understanding that is part of being human, and whether I know of alternative methods or not, I'm still human myself, and that's part of my parenting journey. And actually, it was a parenting coach a while back that gave me the advice to, in the evening when I sit there and feel guilty about how I could have done things differently, to actually write down on paper just 3 things that I did get right. And that actually really shifted my mindset, because if I was to take the list of things that I felt had gone well over the things that had gone wrong, it would usually sort of outweigh, because if I just wasn't looking for them because I'm so hyper-focused on the things that I think that I got wrong. So it's a really good mind shift to just make that little change and remind yourself that actually you've probably done a lot better than you think.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, that's our cognitive bias,
Yeah.
Where if you're feeling like you're struggling in some way, or you are struggling in some way, your brain is going to look for all the information that kind of fits with that.
Yeah.
I remember after having my first 2 quite close together and going out with them and feeling quite lonely. I think that can be a really common experience. Not just in early motherhood, but throughout. I think sometimes feeling quite, you're never alone, but you can definitely feel lonely.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think I remember seeing lots of groups of mums all kind of chatting in the park and this place that I was at. And I remember saying to myself, this is that cognitive bias happening. And this is why awareness is so important, because then you can notice what's happening in the moment. So that's when I was like, right, take the blinkers off, Jade, and now consciously look for all the mums who are there, who are standing on their own. And there were loads. There were suddenly loads that just appeared from nowhere. Yeah. And it actually led me to go and say hi to one of them, and I think, exactly what you've just described. It's a beautiful way of just being able to say, you're giving yourself a hard time because you're focusing on the thing or the things, or even if you had a bad day, but actually there's so many other experiences that your children are having with you.
Definitely, yeah. You just got to look for them, haven't you? So how do we get our kids to listen without threats and bribes or losing our cool? I think that's something that we all want the answer to.
The magical answer. I mean, first off, it's just acknowledging that, kids have a different agenda to us.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time what we call defiance is actually just a child wanting something different, not wanting to do something we want to do. And it comes down to control. And I think ultimately, like as human beings, we like to be in control. We have busy agendas. We need to get out the door, right? And you'll know this with 3 kids. For me, it's not just the kids I'm trying to get out the door. It's also my husband. So, but ultimately, like we call it not listening, but really the kind of not listening is more of a relational challenge that we have, in that we are so busy in our lives. We often yell instructions from another room. I'm a culprit of this. Or we'll say things on repeat. And really kids have underdeveloped brains, the part of their brain that actually kids are very good at being very present, right? They're very good at being engrossed in the thing that they're doing, and they're not great at splitting their attention. And so we have to gain their attention. And so getting down on their level, tapping their shoulder. I have this rule that I don't always follow, but I try to, which is like, it's only ever say something once, maybe twice, because if I say or ask the same request more than twice, my irritation is gonna really come up for me. That's when I need to change my communication. So what I would always say is always connect. Just connect with the thing that they're doing. Spend 10 seconds. So even though you've set the timer and you want them to come off their iPad, and now they don't want to come off their iPad, even though they said that they would. We've all been there. And it's like, it's just connect with them. Like notice what it is that they're doing, how much they're enjoying it before asking them to come off the iPad, for example. I think also speaking a child's language, which is very much playfulness, silliness. And I think the challenge with that is we're often so exhausted, so tired. I don't have another playful idea in my body. And I think that's where it's difficult. But the more that you can find that playfulness, that silliness, a child not wanting to brush their teeth, how can you bring some fun and silliness to it? If you've got young kids, just being able to play games with them, like, if I come back into this room. So rather than a threat, a threat would be if I come back into this room and I don't see that you've got your clothes on, you're going to be, whatever, we're not going to the park kind of thing. What you're doing is you're pitching, and we've all been there, but we're pitching ourselves against our child. Yeah. It kind of already, so if you have a strong-willed child who thrives off autonomy and control, they are not going to like that, right? They are going to push back on that. And so really we want to be thinking about how can we make this fun? How can we make this silly? So it's more of a game, more of like, if I come back into this room and I see a child wearing his jumper, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if I'm going to have to do this mum's silly dance or if I'm going to have to do something else. I just don't know what's going to, maybe I'll even sing that crazy song again. Oh, I don't know, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And, yes, it takes a little bit more energy to think about these fun, silly things that we can do with our kids. But for me, it actually expends less energy than that feeling like I am just nagging.
Yeah, you're so right, because I think we're always trying to find the quickest way to get the outcome that we want. And sometimes when we kind of push them and just want them to just do it, I know my husband and I have that conversation. Why can't they just do it? But they don't, because they're kids. So if we do actually put that energy into being that little bit more playful, then it doesn't really take any more energy or any more time in the long run. It's actually a more pleasant experience because you actually feel a little bit more lighthearted yourself, rather than when you're nagging and moaning and feeling like you're hitting a brick wall because they're not doing it anyway. And I know my kids are great examples of that as well. I was nagging at my my middle child, my 5-year-old, to brush his teeth the other day, and he didn't want to do it. And he just loves to be silly. So everything has to be about bananas. I don't understand. Everything's about bananas. So when I started being a little bit silly and said, yes, we're brushing your teeth with bananas, and he was giggling his head off, he did actually start to brush his teeth, rather than when I was sort of hounding him to just brush your teeth, we've got to go. I was just getting resistance, and he was just larking about and not really wanting to do it. Whereas when actually engaging with him, it was much easier to direct him into the behaviour that I wanted to do and then actually move on to the next task. But yeah, it did take a bit of energy in the moment, and I had to really dig deep to find the funny side of the bananas again.
Yeah, and absolutely. And also another thing is we often don't realise we're doing it, but we often tell our kids a lot of no's and stop and don't.
Yeah.
And I think just sometimes recognising our kids get a lot of that, especially if you've got kids at preschool or school. They are being told what to do, when to do it, how not to do it. You can't go to the loo. No, you can't have a drink. Why are you asking for that now? And they come home. And, it's almost like that pent-up energy that they've held on to. And so actually sometimes giving our kids some autonomy, some control in their life is really, really important. And so, again, you can play some fun games. You can, there's lots of different ways that you can do that. But just recognising that actually, and I think this is the most important thing, whether we're talking about not listening or meltdowns or whatever the behaviour or the challenge might be, is how can I better understand what's beneath this behaviour, what's driving the behaviour? Because then we have a much more compassionate understanding, and it's me with my child against the problem. So we have a not listening problem, if you like, or we have a, how can we work together to make this more fun, to make this more, easier? Because ultimately that's what we're trying to do in relationship, is how can we get on the same team? How can we work together? But I think often we do also sometimes have unrealistic expectations of some young kids because of the, the brain development that they have and the lack of that. And actually, sometimes I don't want to do things that my husband wants me to do. And actually, sometimes I have that part of my personality that says, if someone tells me, that I should do something, I think, well, I don't know if I want to do that thing.
Definitely. I hate that. I hate being told what to do.
Right.
I completely get that. So why do kids have such big feelings, and why is it important to actually let them feel them rather than trying to fix everything for them?
Right. So I don't necessarily think that kids have bigger feelings than we do. They just, from the age of kind of, and I don't want to name this, but let's just say, 18 months plus, you start to see what we might label as tantrums, meltdowns, things like that, because kids start to feel all of the feelings and they have none of the skills yet to manage them. They don't even have the brain capacity. So the part of the brain that actually helps us regulate emotions is the front part of the brain. And even though you look at your child and yes, they might be smaller and shorter than you, they look like they have a fully formed head and brain. But actually the brain takes 25 plus years to be fully developed.
Crazy, isn't it?
It's really crazy. And so actually children don't learn to regulate or manage their emotions by being told to manage their emotions. We have to show them. And actually how children learn to regulate emotions, and remember, regulate does not mean get rid of, right? And that's a big change to how we were raised, right? Because we would have been raised in a way to, anger is bad, sadness is bad, don't cry. And so we have it built into our system that we need to stop the emotion. At the same time, we don't necessarily want our children to be completely flooded by their emotions. And so really it's just understanding that what overwhelms our children, because they don't yet have the skills to manage those, they need to be in the presence of a regulated, not necessarily fully calm, but regulated adult who helps them through a process of co-regulation. And this is ultimately, so I will say to parents, if your child is having a massive meltdown, say less.
Yeah.
We tend to go into logical explaining why they can't have the banana now because you're about to have dinner. Zip it. Just say less. Just be like, and sometimes name the wish. You really wish you could have a banana right now. And then zip it. And you breathe. if you've ever had a situation, which I'm sure most of us have, where you're feeling particularly dysregulated or anxious, or let's say you're particularly annoyed about something, and I don't know, your husband, your partner, your friend comes to you and says, just calm down. It just enrages our brain. It enrages our body, because feelings don't want to be fixed.
Yeah.
They want to be felt. They want to be
seen. You don't feel listened to, do you? You don't feel
Right.
that person is hearing what you're saying and why you're upset, because to you it matters.
Right.
So if we're not listening to that child, we're kind of invalidating their experience, aren't we?
Right. And validation is so important, to validate the emotion. Although I was having a conversation with a group of parents yesterday, because they were talking about how for some children, for our more deeply feeling sensitive kids, sometimes validating emotions can, and this might be just as simply as saying, I can see you're upset, or it's okay to cry, let it out. My middle son is definitely a deeply feeling sensitive kid. And sometimes validating the emotion can actually erupt the emotion even further. It doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong. And if you notice that with your child, sometimes instead of validating the emotion, what we can do is validate the magnitude of the emotion. Whoa, that's a big feeling right there. Yeah, so you don't have to necessarily get too close to the vulnerable kind of emotion, because that can really put the shame shutters up. But ultimately, kids have big feelings, and they want things, and we want our children to want things. We don't want to raise kids who don't, who've kind of shut that down. And I think for most of us, and it's no fault of our parents or our parents' parents, but we were very much raised in a behavioural time, which is around, emotions are not healthy to have, that we need to shut those down. So now when our kids are flailing their arms and having these massive meltdowns because they can't have the banana that they want, and our body starts to experience that. This is a threat. This is where we start to get triggered, because if I had behaved like that with my parents, how would they have responded? Would that have been safe? And now I'm trying to help my kids have this experience with me that I didn't have as a child. And that's why it feels messy.
Yeah. And it's hard, isn't it? I know with my children, when they're having a meltdown in that moment, I do really try and say to myself, that it's not my job to end the tantrum. It's my job just to be there and hold space for it. But I can't tell you how unpleasant it feels. It feels so horrible in my body. I hate it. I hate the screaming. I hate the meltdown. And every bit of me wants to dive in and just stop it. Just stop the chaos, stop the noise, and stop the tantrum. So it is hard to learn to hold space for something that we weren't naturally, in a way that we weren't naturally raised as kids.
100%. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think we need to name that. We need to name that just because I'm finding something hard or finding something uncomfortable doesn't mean I'm getting it wrong. And I think, we're not aiming here to raise happy kids. We're aiming here to kind of raise children and ourselves at the same time. To actually be able to, experience the emotions. Like, emotions, ultimately, when we think about what they are, they're somatic sensations in our body, and they're meant to move us. They have messages for us. Like, and I know parents I work with, they really want their kids to be able to stand up for themselves, to not be treated badly as they grow up, to kind of have boundaries for themselves, to say no when something doesn't feel good. So we don't want to be discouraging children saying no to us sometimes, although that makes parenting more challenging. We want to be raising kids who can stand up for themselves and feel things. And really it's about, and I think there's this concept of like, we've got to sit with our feelings. What even is that? Like, what does that even look like? I'm just going to sit here with all my feelings just completely overwhelming me. So I do think there's nuance in this. And I do think there are practical ways that we can teach ourselves and then teach our kids to move through the emotion, but not shutting it down, but just moving through it. And some kids do need a bit of help. So sometimes we do need to scoop our kid up and take them somewhere quieter, take them outside, help them move their body, stomp their feet. It isn't just about validating and let's just all sit here with this really overwhelming thing.
So can you give us an example of what that would look like in the moment? Because I know that's something I struggle with my kids, is sometimes holding space for that emotion. But exactly that, how do I then move them on? Because sometimes that can be quite challenging. Otherwise, I feel like we can just sit there for a long period of time.
Yeah. And again, there's nuance in this. So again, it kind of can depend on the child. It can depend on the age. But ultimately, and also trying things out. So like what you'll probably find, you have more than one child, certain things will help one child that will not help the other,
yeah.
right? But I would say that, sometimes it can be a case of like, scooping them up. If it's like an argument between two siblings, having to separate them, we have to become the boundary that they can't create for themselves yet. Sometimes it might be around naming the emotion. Sometimes it might be around, let's move our body. Sometimes it might even be around, if you have small children, mine are starting to get a little bit big for this just because they're pretty heavy. But sometimes it is a case of actually holding them. Sometimes we can, do they need a hug? Do they need space? Some children will actually ask you for space. They'll say, go away, leave me alone. Usually being completely left or abandoned is actually our child's worst fear, but we can respect their space. So we can say something like, I'm right over here, I will never leave you. But I would say sometimes it just depends, if they are up for trying to do movement. The trouble is if we start speaking too much in that really heightened distress state, like coming up with, we could try this, we could try that, and coming up with all of the strategies, your child might be like, just stop, because we're just speaking too much. So sometimes what we can do to help them move through it is really focusing on, it's easier to explain with a young child, but you're sort of almost like you're doing the breathing and you're trying to almost pass that breath into them, that feeling of like really trying to just like, and so almost having this running mantra, I'm safe, nothing bad is happening. But as I said, some kids may be in a situation where they just need to go somewhere quiet, so we have to kind of help them do that. We can also help children just notice like we need to move our bodies. So again, and that could be through music, it could be through stomping, it could be through, if children are in a kind of like agitated throwing, instead of saying stop throwing, it might be that the brick they have, we need to take off them because that's not okay, that's not safe, but give them something they can throw. So you're kind of like moving, shifting, redirecting the energy. If they're kicking their sibling, they absolutely cannot kick their sibling, but they can kick something soft. Let's go outside. Let's do some karate chops. And yes, they might resist. And they probably won't thank you in the moment. But these are like the small drops that we're modelling and showing and teaching them. And we're kind of teaching ourselves at the same time, right?
Yeah. And I guess sometimes as well, I know with my kids, it's harder to teach the lesson in the moment. So sometimes I find if at bedtime we readdress that big blow up that happened a couple of hours previously and we come up with some strategies that we could use next time, like you say, it's not okay to kick your brother, but we could go out and kick the ball in the garden next time. Or one strategy I've implemented with my children is when you get annoyed at each other, it's not okay to hit. Maybe you could go in your own rooms, give each other some space. Then we're kind of upskilling them for the next time they're in this situation. We've talked about it, we've rehearsed it. So again, through practice and repetition, hopefully they will start to learn that skill so that they'll be able to implement it on their own one day. That's the dream.
I love that. And I think one of my mantras on repeat with parents, with myself, is now is not a teaching moment.
Yeah.
So in the heat of it all, just have this mantra, safety and contain. Sometimes separate. You be the boundary. Regulate yourself. Nothing else matters.
Yeah.
Dishing out some kind of consequence or like it's ineffective. And so in the moment, it really isn't about teaching. Teaching can come later.
Yeah.
And I think as long as we're connecting when we're recorrecting, when we're trying to say, oof, that was a really, really tough moment earlier, I'm wondering what we could, right? So you've already done that connection because ultimately that's what we want, isn't it? We just want to be seen. We want to feel safe. And yeah, absolutely. And remembering that even though you've given the lesson once, twice, 350,000 times, that's parenting.
Yeah.
And that's on us to deal with that frustration, right? Because actually they do need to hear and experience this on repeat, drips and drops. And what you'll see as children grow up is it will change. It will change shape. That what starts out as a tantrum or a meltdown starts to become huffing and puffing and eye rolling. This is still forms of dysregulation and immaturity because it takes 25 years for the brain to be fully developed. Yeah. And even then, we're fully fledged adults and we're still trying to figure this stuff out too.
I was going to say, I think most adults I know, we're still all a little bit subject to that behaviour, aren't we? So of course, sometimes we hold our children to slightly higher expectations than we're able to.
I call it energy matching.
Yeah.
When my daughter will end up kind of like go, oh, mum, and I'll be like, oh, what? Oh. I've just energy matched my own daughter. Or like there have definitely been times in my house where they've come into my office and they start yelling and I'll be like, will you stop yelling in my office? Oh, I'm yelling in my office. I'm not sure what that's teaching my children. Yeah. So again, we can catch ourselves doing that. We can have some humanness and humility about this.
Definitely. I think we're all guilty of that for sure. So, Jade, do you have any final words of advice for parents who feel judged by their children's behaviour? Say if it's a tantrum, their manners, they don't say thank you well enough. Any final words of advice?
Yeah, I think ultimately surround yourself with parents who get it, and are aligned more with your values. I think that the more we can understand what lies beneath our children's behaviour, like what really drives behaviour and the development of our children. So, for example, you have a 5-year-old who's lying and you feel embarrassed or judged. Ultimately, it's actually very developmentally appropriate for a 5-year-old to tell fibs or to tell lies. I won't go into all the reasons why, but there's reasons for this. And it's actually about how do we help our children feel safe to tell the truth. Children, it's developmentally appropriate and actually very healthy for children to have tantrums and meltdowns. So really it's about understanding what lies beneath the behaviour so we can separate what's mine and what's theirs. And I think that's the challenge, really, because the messages we will have been given is that tantrums, meltdowns, not listening is a form of disrespect. And we need to challenge that. We need to really get to what lies beneath our children's behaviours and their development. And yeah, give ourselves permission to be human.
Yeah.
It's the most important thing, because ultimately you will be giving your kids the gift to be human too.
I love that. And can I just ask, who shaped your parenting journey the most?
Oh gosh, who shaped my parenting journey the most? In terms of professionals, do you think? In terms of my learning?
Professionals or any family members or relatives, anyone that you feel you've taken some big lessons from that you would like to carry forward into your children's lives?
Oh gosh, so many. I think ultimately I've learnt loads from my own parents, because I have had an open relationship with them. They definitely find some of my work quite triggering. We have some interesting and heated discussions about it. I honestly think my children are teaching me the most.
Yeah, I love that.
If I'm honest, my children are teaching me so much about myself. And I had no idea that parenting was going to be this emotional. And I think that actually the parts of me that get triggered, these are gifts, as hard as it feels in the moment, they're gifts. And if we can get compassionately curious about that, yeah.
That's beautiful. Lovely. Well, thank you for joining me on the podcast today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here to discuss everything from, parental guilt to understanding why we shout and what we can do about it and helping guide our children through those moments. It's been a pleasure, and I think that's going to be a really useful podcast to the listeners.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Lovely. Thank you.